Sayaka Yasunaka. Please start the presentation, Sayaka.
Oh, yes. Right. Right. Can I start now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes. My name is Sayaka Yasunaka from Tohoku University, and just last month, I got new affiliation in Jamstack too. So now I have two affiliation. One is Tohoku University and Jamstack. And anyway, my original background is physical oceanography, but my research interest is ocean carbon and nutrient cycle. And research topics is like a large-scale ocean surface nutrient and CO2 variabilities and subsurface chlorophyll maximums, and also the Arctic Ocean CO2 mapping like this ones. So today I want to talk about the CO2 uptake in the Arctic Ocean. And first of all, I want to say thank you for giving me this great opportunity anyway. All right, and as a result of human activities, such as fossil fuel burning and land use change, anthropogenic carbon is released to the atmosphere. And not all carbon remains in the atmosphere, but substantial part of them are uptaken by land and oceans. And 1/4 of the atmospheric release is uptaken on land, and another 1/4 is uptaken by oceans, and others remain in the atmosphere. So in other words, thanks to the terrestrial and ocean uptake, CO2 increase in the atmosphere is suppressed at these levels. If there is no uptaken by land and oceans, CO2 level is much higher than the present. CO2 level in the atmosphere is much higher than the present, and the global warming is much severe. So we can say that the ocean CO2 uptake is important for the global warming. And next, I want to explain briefly how to calculate the CO2 exchange. And CO2 exchange can be calculated by using these formulas. The difference between partial flush of CO2 in ocean and the difference between two PCO2, one is the ocean and the other one is atmosphere. And times wind speed, like this one. And in the Arctic oceans, in the Arctic case, there is a sea ice. So sea ice concentration term is added like this one. Yeah, all right. And when the PCO2 in the ocean is lower than the PCO2 in the atmospheres, the ocean uptake CO2. And when the PCO2 in the water, ocean is larger, higher than the PCO2 in the atmospheres, ocean would release the CO2 to the atmospheres. And when the wind is strong, the CO2 exchange would be large. And when the wind is weak, the CO2 exchange would be small. And the sea ice works as the wall between atmosphere and the oceans. So if there is many sea ice, the CO2 exchange would be small. And when sea ice is little, the CO2 exchange would be large. And among these parameters, we can get wind speed from the atmospheric reanalysis product, and sea ice concentration can be get from the satellite. And the variation scale of PCO2 in the atmosphere is very large, both in time and space. So we can know the PCO2 air in the atmosphere from a few measurements. On the other hand, the variation scale of PCO2 in the ocean is very small. So the PCO2 in the ocean is essential to estimate the CO2 flux between the ocean and the atmospheres. Right, next I briefly explain how to measure the ocean PCO2. And after the mid-1990s, ocean PCO2 can be measured on board automatically. And ship has a seawater inlet at the bottom, and seawater from the inlet goes to the measurement room on board. And this is the photo of the measurement room of Gjelstrup research vessel Mirai. And this is the water chamber, and this is the measurement device. And seawater comes into the water chamber, and the gas in the chamber became equilibrium with the seawater. And then equilibrium gas goes to the measurement device, and the CO2 concentration is measured. Right, and measurement do not need to stop ship, so CO2 measurement can be conducted not only on the research vessel, but also on the commercial ship. So now many private companies cooperate so far, and as a result, observational data increase in various oceans, but in the Arctic Ocean, as that data is limited. Right. And but anyway, now we have many CO2 data, but they still include many uncertainties. So to better quantify and understand the CO2 flux into and out of the land or oceans, we conducted the project called Regional Carbon Cycle Assessment and Process 2, Recap 2. Right, and Recap has been conducted under GCBG Global Carbon Project. And we assessed regional budget and temporal variations by using atmospheric inversions, land or ocean models, and InSight or satellite observations. And land and oceans are divided into several regions, and the assessment papers in each region has been published in the special issue of GBC last year? Yeah, or this year, from last year to this year's, right? And I am in charge of the Arctic Ocean part with many collaborators. So I want to share with you today. I want to share that result with you today. All right. So why is the Arctic Ocean is important? As you know, the Arctic Ocean has sea ice. And in the past, CO2 exchange is considered to be almost zero because of the thick sea ice. But recently, the sea ice retreats and the ice-free area expands. And if there is no sea ice, the interaction area, the ocean without sea ice can interact with the atmosphere directly. So maybe it is important. And also, some people found that the non-zero CO2 exchange, they found there is some substantial CO2 exchange even in the sea ice areas. So if so, then the cold Arctic Ocean would be an important area of CO2 uptake. And in addition, the CO2 uptake directly connects to the ocean acidifications, and ocean acidification would become evident in the Arctic Ocean at first. So it is important to estimate the CO2 uptake in the Arctic Ocean, we think. But however, the detail of the CO2 uptake are unknown because of the limited observation in the Arctic oceans. And in the first implementation of the recap, the Arctic CO2 uptake is estimated around these numbers, but it was concluded not to reliably constrain because of the limited data and model performance. So this trial, the trial in the recap 2 is the first trial for the Arctic Ocean CO2 assessment. All right, and this is the data we used, and all right, and we used all data that are collected in the recap 2 framework, and using these all data, Arctic CO2 uptake was assessed. All right, and we used 8 PCO2 observational-based product and 18 ocean biogeochemical models and 6 atmospheric inversions like this. All right. So first, we assessed long-term mean of CO2 flux integrated all over the Arctic oceans. And this is a result. And yeah, negative number means the uptake, CO2 uptake in the oceans. And each mark is from each estimate from the model and CO2 observational based product and the atmospheric inversions. And most of all estimates show uptake CO2 into the Arctic oceans. And number is like this one's, and this number is about 4 to 7% of global ocean uptake. And this is the spatial variations, and we can see the CO2, and again, the negative number means the CO2 uptake to the oceans, and we can see the CO2 uptake in almost all areas in all categories, and among them, we can see the strong uptake in Barents Sea, like this ones. And this figure shows the sea ice concentration from the satellite, and we can say that this strong CO2 uptake in the Barents Sea because of the little sea ice in these areas, and also because of the strong wind. Right. Next is the seasonal cycle of CO2 flux and related variables. And this figure shows the Arctic CO2 flux from January to December from each estimate. Right. And all of them shows the negative. If we calculate the ensemble mean of all estimate, the all ensemble mean shows the negative number in all months. And it means from the January to December, the Arctic Ocean uptake CO2, but among them, the large uptake especially in summer, because sea ice is little and PCO2 in the ocean is low. And also, we can see some difference between the observational-based product and models. It means the model is a little bit weaker summer uptake than the observational based estimate. All right, next we calculate the CO2 flux trend during this period. And this is the time series of CO2 flux averaged over the Arctic oceans. And we can see the CO2 uptake is increasing gradually. And the rate of this increase is like this one, and it is 10 to 30% in every years. And this increasing rate is a little larger than the global means we found. All right. And this figure shows the spatial pattern of CO2 flux trend, and blue region means the increase of the CO2 uptake. So that is the CO2 uptake increase, especially in the Barents Sea and the Chukchi Seas. And this pattern is closely similar to the sea ice concentration, sea ice retreat patterns. And this figure shows the sea ice concentration trend, and blue region means the larger sea ice retreat, and this pattern is similar to this pattern. So it means the CO2 uptake in the Arctic Ocean is increasing because of the sea ice decreasing. Right, but we don't know what happens after sea ice retreats more in the future. So it means we need to keep our eyes on it. Right, and of course, uncertainty is still large. And this figure shows the CO2 flux from each estimate. And for the CO2 flux, we can see the similar pattern, right? So, I mean, the CO2 flux is consistent in some extent, but PCO2 is not. And this figure shows the PCO2 in the Arctic Ocean from each estimate. And we can see the spatial distribution is so different among the estimate, right? In some models shows very high PCO2 in these areas, but some estimate shows low PCO2 like this one. So we need more, we have to pay attention about that. Right, and large uncertainty of PCO2 is because of the limited observation, we think. And this figure shows the number of PCO2 observations in the Arctic oceans. And upper panel shows the how many observations in each 1 degree latitude and 1 degree longitude grid boxes. And the red region shows there is a very large number of observations, and blue region is a few observations, but white region is no observation, sorry, from the period from 1985 to 2000, I think 18 or something. Right. And there are many data in the Atlantic side and Pacific side, but the little data in the central Arctic oceans. And lower panel shows the how many observations in the Arctic Ocean in each month. And after 2005, the data number is increasing, but still data is limited in, I mean, number is increasing, but we can see the seasonal variations. It means in the summer, the data number is increased, but in the winter, the still data is limited. And this figure shows the difference of PCO2 among the product or estimate. And the local red area shows the large difference. And this large, the region where the difference among the product is large is the region where the observation is limited, we think. So that is, we need more data. And now, Arctic research vessel is under construction in Japan, and the present research vessel Mirai can go to the Arctic only in summer, but this new vessel is not, this vessel is not an icebreaker, but it can go to the Arctic in spring and autumn too. So I hope the situation will be better in near futures. Right. So I want to summarize my presentations. So CO2 uptake in the Arctic Ocean was quantified in the recap 2 and assessment, and increasing trend of CO2 uptake was detected. But more data and of course the elaboration of model process are needed. And these results are shown in the recap special issue paper. So if you have interest, please visit our paper. Thank you, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Sayaka, for your important topic. So, you have questions or comment to Sayaka? So I have a question. You show the CO2 increase in the balance and the Chakchi. That depends on the CS degrees. So yeah, this figure. So in the Chakchi, the primary productivity may be increased due to the loss of sea ice, and the increased primary production could increase the absorption of CO2. What percentage of such a biological effect? Is it high or low?
At this stage, we don't know, we don't calculate, but the CO2 ice effect can calculate. And at this stage, the CO2 decrease is much more important than the other effect. But I don't know in the future, maybe more biological effect will be more important. But if there is the biological effect is important, the PCO2 trend is much smaller in this area. Because if the biological CO2 biological effect is important, the PCO2 increase trend would be smaller than the other areas. But in the models, the CO2 increase is larger in these areas. And in the product, the similar trends they showed. So at this stage, we want to say, we concluded that sea ice concentration, sea ice retreat effect is much larger than the biological effect.
Okay, okay, thank you. So, David has a question, so I will raise a question. Recent global carbon budget at very low spatial resolution suggests Arctic Ocean as CO2 sink. Do you agree?
Yes, that is very consistent with our result. Our result shows the CO2 uptake. The Arctic Ocean CO2 uptake at the rate of 4 to 7% of global ocean uptake, global ocean CO2 uptake. So we are totally agree.
Okay. We have some question. or comments? Okay, thank you, Sayaka.
Thank you.
So next talk is from Carl. Please start the presentation, Carl.
Thank you. I'll just try to share my screen.
Mm.
The entire screen. Can you see this okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So thanks for the opportunity to present our work. I'm Carl Attard. I'm an associate professor at the University of Southern Denmark in Odense, so about 150 kilometers west of where Caroline is sitting. And I have a small research group here, and we're 5 people, and you can see us in this picture here. And yeah, so we mostly focus on the photic seafloor, so the light exposed seafloor, and various aspects of that, looking at primarily primary production rates of different primary producers on the seafloor. And this talk will focus on our Arctic work, which is sort of quite a big part of what we do. But the expertise in the group ranges from sort of people doing experimental work in the lab. We do in situ work as well. And we have a data scientist as well in our group who looks at these larger scale models. So we're used to seeing, this sort of data, looking at phytoplankton production in the Arctic. These are quite sort of remarkable trends that we're seeing in the Arctic, with a sort of steady increase in phytoplankton production over time. And so this is quite well known. I think by now, the papers are highly cited as well. And what we focused on recently was we pitched this perspective to PNAS about seafloor primary production. So not phytoplankton, but rather primary producers located on the seafloor of the Arctic Ocean. And so I brought together this quite large group, and we tried to come up with some ideas about what we need to know about these primary producers in order to include them more fully in our understanding of how the Arctic ecosystem functions, and how it's changing, and what that might mean for primary production in the Arctic. So the reason why we focus on the Arctic is because the Arctic has a huge coastline, first of all, and it's also the shallowest of all the oceans. Its shelf area is about 50% of the total area. We know it has these huge shelf areas. And light propagation models based on satellites sensing from space, so ocean color remote sensing primarily, estimate that a substantial proportion of this seafloor area could be exposed to light. And so we generally expect there to be substantial primary production, colonizing probably about half of the shelf area in total. So naturally, when we think of seafloor primary producers, the big stuff comes to mind. There are some seagrasses in the Arctic, Zostera, which we know from lower latitudes, and it's not perhaps as widespread as the macroalgae that we know. So the kelps that form both from the intertidal zone all the way down to the mesophotic areas in the Arctic. And naturally, of course, the benthic diatoms, which is something that we study in our group as well. These are microscopic algae that live on the seafloor. So they're specific. They're not phytoplankton. They are actually species that have evolved both sort of behaviorally and from their genetic makeup to be able to harvest the conditions and to live in the conditions that are unique to the seafloor. And we don't often think about the benthic photic zone, I think, as a community, but it is a thing. And light that reaches the seafloor is very rapidly attenuated in the surface sediments. So the photic zone is only about 1 millimeter thick. And the benthic algae, benthic microalgae, are sort of experts of taking advantage of this niche. And if you measure the amount of chlorophyll in 1 meter squared on the seafloor in a light exposed area, the amount of chlorophyll in that area could be larger than the entire concentration within the water column above it. So it's very densely packed. It can be very densely packed and a high, highly nutritious source for fauna to graze on if they can access it. So there are some studies that have sort of tried to put together the production by the different by known sources. This example is from Young Sound in Northeast Greenland, where we do quite a lot of our work as well. And the case studies are few and far between, I would say. The ones that actually do comparisons between phytoplankton, macroalgae, and microalgae. But you can see in this case, for instance, in this study by Sarn and Ronnie, that the benthic primary producers, so the macroalgae, microalgae, and to a smaller extent the corallines, can constitute a substantial proportion of the total primary production in this outer fjords area. So our sort of idea about seafloor primary production in the Arctic is not new per se, but it was the first time that we tried to bring together the main taxa, the main primary producers, to try to come up with a sort of more complete estimate of Arctic benthic primary production. So the way we measure production matters, and most measurements of the macro stuff, so the macrophytes, the seaweeds, and the seagrasses in the Arctic are based on biomass addition methods. So the leaf tagging method in the case of macroalgae and kelps, and the biomass addition, which you can see is a sum of above and below ground production in seagrasses. So this is net biomass accumulation, and obviously sort of underestimates the amount of primary production that takes place. There's another way to do this is by looking at fluxes, so measuring biogeochemical fluxes, in this case oxygen. This is a very simplified equation of photosynthesis, but it shows that oxygen is both produced as a byproduct of photosynthesis, and it's also consumed directly or indirectly during respiration. So it's one of the most widely used tracers of both primary production and respiration in benthic ecosystems. The method that we use, that I use in our lab a lot, and that we work on and continue to develop, is the aquatic edicovariance method. It's a non-invasive method. We published the first review of the method a couple of years ago. I didn't include much slides about it. Of course, you're welcome to ask me more. But anyone who's interested perhaps can have a look at this paper as well, where we try to provide an entry point for people interested in this technology. But it's essentially, we're measuring the turbulent transport of oxygen within the benthic boundary layer. And over time, we can see how much oxygen is being transported towards the seafloor and away from the seafloor, and calculate a flux every 15 minutes approximately over multiple days. And the a lot of the fluxes that went into these calculations that we did for this perspective for the microalgal dominated habitats were based on this technology. So work we did mostly around Greenland. So as I mentioned, the way you measure primary production matters. And we did some comparisons a few years ago between what we'd get by measuring biogeochemical fluxes using eddy covariance and what we'd get using biomass addition. And typically we saw that in this Fucus vesiculosus canopy, the biomass addition methods underestimated the true sort of primary production rate. We only got to about half of the number that we got to with biogeochemical fluxes, which sort of makes sense as well. But it's just a point that we should consider, how we measure primary production as well when we want to upscale it to get some sort of broader perspectives. So for this paper, we used what we had, which was a mixture of flux measurements and biomass addition methods. And there's a lot of sort of extrapolation. It was a perspective article after all. And it sort of raises more questions than answers, I would say. But we sort of using habitat distribution models and the rates, we came up with some numbers for what we think could be the pan-Arctic annual primary production of seagrasses, macroalgae, and microalgae. And this value comes to about, in total, about 77 teragrams of carbon per year. And you can see here how it ranks against some other estimates. So sea ice algae is about 18, depending on what estimate you see. I think that's a median we took from some different studies. And the pelagic, we just use one of the most recent numbers that we found based on ocean color remote sensing. So you can see that the benthic production is quite substantial and could amount to about between 20 to 35% of the phytoplankton production. So we also estimated using ocean color remote sensing. So these are actually data sets that exist. It's a data set by Rakesh Kumar Singh and his co-authors. And so we only just used the data sets that they provided us, which were fantastic data sets of benthic PAR. So PAR reaching the seafloor. And it's essentially a radiative transfer model within the atmosphere, through the ice, if ice is there, and through the water, and combined with the bathymetry, you can estimate how much PAR is reaching the seafloor. And what we did in this analysis is we tried to estimate what's the maximum area of the seafloor in the Arctic that's exposed to PAR. And when we did this, we sort of discovered that the largest area typically occurs in August, and in one case it was in September. And the rate at which this area has been increasing, so the light exposed region of the Arctic has been increasing at a rate of about 47,000 kilometers squared per year. 47,000 kilometers squared is about the area of Denmark. So the area that's been becoming exposed to light in the Arctic has been increasing. And so we can think of, what this might mean from an ecosystem perspective as these macrophytes and microalgae might proliferate further into the Arctic. So we also estimated the microalgal. So these are the microalgae living in the sediments. We estimated their primary production. We derived the functional relationship between daily primary production and daily PAR reaching the seafloor. And this was based on quite a lot of data we collected using eddy covariance. And if we look at the trend, I was quite surprised to see that it looks incredibly boring. It's a flat line. And we're wondering why that would be the case. Because if we look at phytoplankton production, if you remember, that increases steadily at a rate of about 7 teragrams of carbon per year. So quite surprising to see that overall, when we look at this, and of course it's a huge area, but when we look at this area, it's really quite, yes, there isn't much of a trend over there, except perhaps between some years. So we wanted to explore this further, and what we looked at, the data that we had, data for the KD, so the light extinction coefficient. I'll just bring that up for now. And when we looked at the trends of each pixel over time, we could see that, I think this is data for August, so when we would expect there to be the largest light exposed area of the seafloor. We could see positive trends, meaning that the water has become less transparent over the past 18 years. So the data set covered, I think, a time period from 2003 to 2020. So all the sort of green areas are areas where the waters have become less transparent, and the blue, the darker areas, are the areas that have become more transparent over the past 20 years or so. And if we convert that to a microalgal benthic primary production, we can also see that some areas are orange, the sort of orange-yellow color that suggests there's been an increase in benthic primary production in these areas, as determined through our sort of relatively simple model. And the blue areas, we actually expect negative trends in benthic primary production over time. So there seems to be quite a strong regional sort of dynamics as well, as we would expect in the Arctic. But overall, the picture looks sort of quite complicated. It's not just, it doesn't seem to be as sort of, the trends don't seem to be as clear as they are in the pelagic zone of the Arctic Ocean. So we're sort of looking a little bit more into this now, and we started looking into the time aspect as well, but within the year. Excuse me. So this analysis is by one of my PhD students, who's looking at the sort of growth days of different taxa, different primary producers on the seafloor. And what you can see here is that the trends in the number of growth days on a pan-Arctic scale, again over here, have increased quite dramatically in the spring and in the early summer. So there are more days where the threshold of light is above what's needed for growth of, in this case, it's the microalgae growing on the seafloor. But this is being counterbalanced in the autumn, in the late summer and in the autumn. And this trend seems to be quite consistent for different regions of the Arctic too. So Espen's been working on different regions as well and calculating these sorts of statistics for it. Some regions, by the way, increased by about tenfold in the spring and early summer. So the number of pixels where growth can occur. Excuse me. But again, so the net change you can see is sort of still quite balanced, and that's probably why we do not see strong increases overall in benthic primary production. So I'm actually coming to the end of my talk as well. I got through it quite quickly, but we sort of finished the. We ended the perspective with some suggestions for what we need to improve in order to include benthic primary production more fully. And a lot of these don't really come as a surprise. What really surprised me is that Arctic bathymetry is extremely important, because it constrains everything pretty much. How we estimate how much light on the Arctic on the seafloor is present. All sorts of things. The substrate type obviously emerges as being really important, and we have we don't have very much data on that. The factors affecting water transparency, so the KD values that we used are sort of a black box, but in reality, naturally there's the inorganic particles, the organic particles, and dissolved substances that could affect that. So it would be really interesting to open up that box a little bit more, and we have plans to do that together with our colleagues from Canada. And another factor that emerged, and it's something that I'm quite interested in, is the benthic primary production in the mesophotic, so areas of the seafloor that are deeper than 30 meters. And even though the rates are quite low, it seems that just because of the sheer size of these areas, they are quantitatively quite important. And we could imagine that the light climate that these sort of regions experience could be quite different compared to what their shallower counterparts would see, just because of how light propagates through the water column and the different wavelengths of light that are filtered with depth. And this is something that we're looking into as well. With that, I'll end. I hope it wasn't too short, but this is the end of my talk. And thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you about our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your interesting talk about the benthic primary production. So, some comments or questions to Carl? So the result is interesting. In spite of increase of PAR, PAR, the production, basic production is flat. In the future, that trend change, or do you have some aspect? Do you have some prospect for the future?
Yeah, that's a good point. So to what extent would it continue to? Yeah, that's a good question. Do you know anyone who sort of does future modeling of light availability? I'm not really sure of anyone who does that. But I could imagine. So if we think that, the runoff from rivers and the erosion perhaps from the coastal zone might eventually decline. It sort of depends on the timescales, I suppose. There's a lot of different factors though, because we would imagine that it could be resuspension too. That is, less ice and more wind would resuspend the material, which would affect the benthic zone naturally. So I'm not sure about that, but perhaps I'm happy to hear any thoughts as well on that. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question from online. Could you ask DAV David, please make a question for Carl. Okay.
Yeah, so I see the question here. So it's microalgae versus PAR calculation. The one that showed no long-term trends looks very meteorological clouds or cloudiness and atmospheric illumination model. I believe that yeah, that's a good question. I believe that the model so the PAR model that we use, the benthic PAR model, the one by Rakesh, considers cloudiness as well. In fact, I think that's his expertise. Actually, he tends to do that. I'm not sure if the question sort of alludes to whether this could be because of that, or whether we've considered that. I think the model itself considers it, but I haven't really thought about it anymore as a sort of driving factor of the dynamics that we see.
Okay. So Claire, can you give us a question?
Yes, I see Claire's question too. It's about, so how did we measure KD par and how it changed? And if we could discuss how we plan to open up this black box approach that we mentioned. So I think KD par in the model is estimated from ocean color remote sensing. There is some validation in situ as well. So they do compare the results that they get with some some par sensors in situ. I think Rakesh and his team did that. The black box approach is not something that we do ourselves in our lab, but it's something that our colleagues in Canada, so Simon Bélanger, and he has a postdoc now who's working on this. And so they're going to be trying to figure out what is driving the KD par over time and space in the Arctic, and trying to sort of tear apart the impacts of different light absorbing components in the water. I don't know if that answers your question, Claire, but I guess I suppose we're not going to do this ourselves.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So do you have another comments, questions? Okay, thank you, Carl. So thank you for all of the presenter. Thank you very much. So before the end of this webinar, I'd like to announce another webinar. Please see the chat box. And